fine, and that you're staying home and practicing social distancing. So this morning I'm going to talk about how to keep inspired with the cello while we're all isolated at home. So of course, a lot of us have been thinking a lot about this. We've had a lot of time to think. One of the things I've heard most often is, okay, now I have time to learn the Kodály solo sonata. And that's great. I hope a lot of people are learning the Kodály solo sonata right now. It's a great piece. It's a wonder. We're just trying to work out how to see the comments right now. So I hope some of you are going to be writing in and writing comments. Right now I can't see them on my iPad, but I hope I will be able to. Oh, maybe I can here. Hold on 1 second. So anyway, greetings from New York City. And so we're sitting here in our apartment in New York with lots of time, although I'm teaching a number of Skype lessons for my Juilliard students who are actually still in session. And some of them are watching right now. So greetings to everyone. I can see who's watching, and I hope people will start writing comments so I can see if the comments are working. So if someone could write a comment, then I'll be able to see that. Great, yes. Hi from Berlin. Wow, this is really cool. All these cellists sitting around watching this. So New York City is pretty calm, although my apartment looks out on Broadway, and I can see a fair amount of activity, even though we're not supposed to go outside. We can hear cars and buses moving around, so it's not completely silent here. We're just trying to figure out if we can see the comments on... Oh yes, okay, so my husband Roger just got this to work so that I can actually see the comments on my other computer while I'm broadcasting to you. So I'm hoping that I'll be able to see questions as we do this. We need to turn the volume down so we don't hear me talking at the same time as I'm talking to you. We're just working this out, so thank you for your patience. Anyway, so I'm open to questions. One thing that I've been thinking a lot about is time. And we musicians are used to spending a lot of time on our own practicing. And all of a sudden now we have all of this incredible amount of time to practice. But at the same time, we don't have any deadlines. And that's a really hard thing to kind of come to terms with. Because we're used to sort of, some of us can practice really well, and sometimes we practice really well without huge deadlines, without a concert coming up. It gives us time to really work on some things we wanted to work on in our playing. Other times we need deadlines to sort of get our work focused in a kind of way. So I'm seeing a lot of people coming in and asking questions, so I'm going to start to address those questions in a minute. And thank you to my husband who just got this all set up. So anyway, if you're having trouble hearing me or if it's not working, let me know, but I think so far we're so good. Okay, so I'm starting to get some questions in from Cello World. Just one thing that I've been thinking about is so this question of, having a sort of open-ended amount of time with no clear deadlines is one of the most challenging things. But of course what it makes us realize is that it's an incredible time to sort of analyze what our practicing is about. And our practicing has to include both long-term goals and short-term goals in order to be effective. And I think that this situation sort of exacerbates that and it magnifies that issue in a big way. So even if we've all had concerts canceled, how do we keep our motivation? How do we give ourselves goals to reach for? So obviously there are obvious ones. I think a lot of people are doing amazing things. going online and playing for everybody online, which is wonderful. One thing in my studio that we're going to start doing is making personalized videos for people. We're going to, where the cellists will introduce themselves and then play a movement of Bach and address it to a certain person, because I think, a lot of, especially elderly people are isolated right now, and they would love a personalized message of music. Some of them are not so obviously able to get online and just see a lot of the stuff that's going on, and having a personal message is really, really important. So I'm getting a huge number of questions now, so I'm going to try to sort of like start at the top and try to address them. I can see people coming on. How often do you practice scales? Okay, I take that question. Ideally every day. Scales are amazing for so many things. One thing I want to talk about scales, though, is that I find, when we practice scales, it's easy to turn off our brains and turn off our musical imagination. And so one of the most important things that I think about practicing scales is that you really have to keep yourself interested in a musically imaginative way. So one of the things that I recommend for practicing scales, what we do in my studio, is we practice character scales. So you might say, take the, for example, a Beethoven 7th scale, where you would take the rhythm of the Beethoven 7th Symphony, bum, ba-dum, bum, ba-dum, and practice that in the character in a specific dynamic, or even in a Beethoven style with some subito dynamics, so that you are practicing that rhythm. You practice the quick shifts that are involved with that rhythm, and it gives you a sort of a musical goal to focus on while you're practicing scales. And so, so I have another question. How do you revisit a piece that you have already known well, such as Bach? That's a great question, because often in our careers, as cellists, we will revisit a piece. Sometimes we get to play it a lot, and then we leave it for many years, and then we come back to it. And of course, for all cellists, Bach is something that we are sort of brought up with and stays with us our whole lives. I think it's amazing with Bach because you can look at it from so many different angles, and certainly in my lifetime, the sort of sense of performance practice with Bach obviously has changed an incredible amount, and that in itself is a way to keep looking at it again and thinking about style and various influences. So keeping it fresh, thinking about new ways of style. I try, for example, like I was just teaching the prelude from the 4th suite, to practice it in many different ways, to not sort of get stuck in one tempo or in one style. So I might try, practicing it in a very, very short, with very short bows. Sort of like that, or I might start it up bow and do it the other way around. So that in itself, just changing the bowing gives you a different sense of the momentum and the way you cross strings and which notes you're bringing out. So changing bowings, and obviously I'm not an expert on this, but people adding ornaments and looking at it in fresh ways on repeats, of course changing articulations. I was thinking this is a great time to look at all those various editions of the Bach, of the original, the early editions of it. So there's so many ways that you can look at Bach in a fresh way. I'm going to take some more questions now. Okay, so one of my students is asking, since we supposedly have more time right now, is it better to set big ambitious goals or smaller, more reasonable goals given the low motivation and general anxiety at this time? Sometimes with low energy, it's difficult to tackle an overwhelming task and nothing ends up getting done. I think that's a really great question, Eliana, and I've been thinking a lot about it. So I think that one thing that I found really helpful, because obviously there's some days where you feel like, oh yes, I'm going to go learn the Kodai Solo Sonata and practice that path and learn all of the Peabody etudes and we're all really motivated in that way, and some days you can do that, you can sit down and just start working on it. And then the next day you just don't want to get out of bed and you just want to look at your phone and look at the news and just, put the cover over your head. And so, consistency is one of the most important things I think that we can all try to achieve. And I think, while it is important to set ambitious long-term goals, I think we need something for every day. And so what I've been doing and what I found really useful actually throughout my life, but particularly now, is to set really small goals. Like say, okay, I was practicing the cadenza from the Shostakovich concerto, which I decided I never learned really, really well enough, and so I'm gonna work on it again. I just take, 3 double stops and say, in the next 10 minutes I'm gonna figure out everything I need to know about those double stops, how I'm shifting, separating the voices, every different way I can think of to practice that. And then, work on it for a given amount of time, say 20 minutes, and then leave it, And sometimes you feel like in those 20 minutes you actually accomplished something, you understood something about those 3 double stops which you hadn't thought of before, and that feels like a small little victory. And I think that those small little accomplishments over adding up is actually the best way to do this, to keep consistency. So this is a question about what a few core principles you encourage your students to focus on in the practice room. So one thing that actually I find that is really important right now, of course, a lot of us are isolated. Some people are lucky enough to have a piano in where they are, but many of us don't have a piano. I've heard a lot about some apps which people can play, like Music -1 apps, but of course it's not the same as collaborating with other people and with piano. But I think it's an incredible opportunity to practice looking at the score and practicing how to work with a score. So one of the things I encourage my students to do is, for example, in the second theme of the Dvorak, concerto, for example, to play actually the cello orchestral line and to sing the cello part at the same time. So you're actually, playing both parts at the same time and understanding what the motion is between those 2 parts and how they interact. So you can do that with so many different pieces, is to play one part and sing the other. And so those of you that are not used to doing that can be quite challenging in itself, but it's a good goal to be able to do. And others of you will be used to doing that and can explore different ways that influences the cello part. So when you're singing something, another part, and understanding what the intrinsic energy of that part, the rhythm of that part, and how it influences the cello part as you sing the cello part against playing the other part. So those kinds of things are really important. I think this sort of emphasis on looking at scores and understanding how the parts interact, there's a lot you can do on your own. And those of you that play the piano well, of course, you can sit down if you have access to a keyboard and work on it that way, but you can certainly do it with the cello. Other important things I think are this idea of setting both long-term goals and short-term goals. So short-term goals for your practice, and actually that can be as minute as in the next 10 minutes I'm going to work on this passage, or in the next at the end of this practice session I will have covered these passages and these specific pieces. But we also talk a lot in our studio about balancing the sort of detailed work with the large-scale work. So we try to divide the practice time into sort of really dissecting a given passage and figuring it out, but also performance time, where you change your mindset and go into performance mode. And one of the quickest and easiest ways we can all do that right now is by recording ourselves. So say we practice something for a given passage and dissect it and analyze it and go into incredible detail, and then take a break and then come back in. And I know I've heard that a wonderful colleague Hans Janssen talks about actually changing where you sit, or moving the room so you have your performance space. And then you sit down and you walk on and pretend you're walking on stage, and you sit down and you have your recorder or your friend who's listening or whoever you're quarantined with is listening, and you perform for them. So you have a performance part of your practicing, and that should be part of everyone's practice in any case. So I'm getting a lot of questions, so I'm just going to try to field them. For an adult starting just a few years ago, do you have any tips for working to get a full, rich tone? I mean, I think the first step for anybody working on the cello is to understand the principles of weight and how using your arm weight gives us a full, rich tone. And one of the things I discovered when I was playing the Shostakovich Trio, and I got really tired in my arm in the fourth movement, where it's so very heavy, and at the time I wasn't doing enough, push-ups and sit-ups, and so I was getting really, really tired in my arm, and so finally I started just holding the bow with my fist like this and just dropping. But actually what I realized was when I did this, I had the most direct connection to my arm weight. So when I hold the bow, if you can see me, I'm holding with my thumb over here, almost kind of like the bow is diagonally across the palm of my hand. So I developed this exercise related to that. So you start with that, and you drop onto the strings. First, the lower two strings, because you can really feel like you drop onto them. And then the next step is that I put my thumb in position on the bow, but I still keep my hand kind of really like almost like a fist. One mistake I see people do is make a fist like this. It shouldn't be a fist like this. It should be like an angled fist, which can turn into a bow grip. So this angled fist sometimes people practice like with Suzuki thumb down here. So the thumb is underneath the frog, and I'm holding the bow in my fist, and I'm just dropping. And then step 2 is to put the thumb into playing position, but not to change the hand. It's still drop, and feel if there's any difference in the sound, and listen to the sound as you do that. Now, just a disclaimer: if you can only do this exercise at the frog. If you go out to the tip, it doesn't really work because this bow hand is not very functional further out. But what it's teaching us about arm weight. So that's the focus of this. So the second step after I put my thumb here, and I keep dropping, is then to go into my bow grip. And notice what changes. And then I go back and forth between the fist, thumb up, and bow grip. And switching. And so that's something you can, for those of you that are beginners, it's hard to do that quickly, so you can do it slower than I'm doing it. But it's a really good exercise to feel that if you go into your bow grip and you feel your arm tensing up, that means that something is tense in your thumb. You can feel it very obviously. So try to get up into your bow grip gradually and keep that fluid feeling in your upper arm as you drop, and then get into your bow grip. So that's one way I work on starting to find the weight for the rich sound. I'm going to take another question here. So another question I had is, how do you improve practice your right hand for better intonation? And I'm going to try to sort of clarify what you mean by that. Obviously we think a lot about our left hand in terms of balance and clarity and getting good intonation. The right hand also has an incredible role to play in terms of listening to contact point and listening to the resonance that you get. Obviously, if you're playing with a fuzzy sound or you're pressing, you're not going to get the kind of ring in the sound. So when you can start with obviously really resonant notes like a D, an open string note, and experiment with your contact and make sure that the open D is ringing while you play that D on the G string. And obviously when you move your contact point around, the quality of the intonation, the quality of the color of the sound changes, and that affects the intonation as well. Wow, this is really exciting. I don't think I've ever had so many people joining from all over the world. So hi, everybody. And a lot of old friends I'm seeing on this. So hi to all of you, former students and friends all over the world. It's really wonderful. Somebody's saying they're getting a delay between the audio and the video. I don't know what to say about that. I'm in an apartment building broadcasting from New York on the 11th floor, and we've been doing our best with the audio, with the boosting our internet. It's just there's so much strain on the internet right now. Even just in my one building, probably on my floor, everybody's working from home. So I think we'll just have to do our best with the internet connection. Okay, so somebody asked how to practice right hand articulation on arpeggio passage in Tempo 1 in Dvorak Concerto, first movement. That's the famous saltato passage. So actually I do have some tricks for working on that passage. One of the things that I've discovered is that some people just do it, some people do it way out in the bow, and you get a very light and nice kind of light sort of bounce in the bow doing that, but it actually is very hard to control the tempo, and it only works in one tempo. So one of the things I've practiced is practicing it a little bit lower in the bow, around the balance point. And one of the things I discovered is really interesting is if you play it actually ponticello and play it right up on the bridge and get a really, really strong ponticello sound and really even at that point. And then if you gradually move your bow away from the bridge, but while you're moving away, you don't lighten the pressure on the bow, so you keep the same pressure. Then it actually allows you to feel the amount of the strength of your bow grip on the bow and how the pressure goes into the stick and causes the bow to stick to be jumpy and to give you that sort of bouncy saltato sound. But then you can also vary that a lot, and it gives you the opportunity to sometimes play more in the string and sometimes bounce a little bit more. So I would say just basically experiment with your contact point on that saltato passage and start it with a really even stroke at the bridge and then gradually move away. And then once you've got that bounce, to try to practice it, to vary the contact point while you're doing it and see how the contact point affects the tension on the bow and how that affects the bounciness. So this is incredible. We've got people from Argentina, from Taiwan, from Brazil. I hope everybody's doing really well. I'm going to take some more questions. Some other ideas to help students develop a flexible and relaxed bow thumb. Yeah, the thumb on the bow is the trickiest thing. Everybody has a slightly different length of thumb. Some people's thumbs bend back a lot, and others are straight and stubby like mine. We all have different relationships, but what we want to try to do is to keep the muscle here malleable, and not to squeeze it so that it's not movable. So obviously there are a lot of like exercises where you can bend just in the air, bend and unbend the fingers. I'm sure many of you have seen the pencil exercise where you take a pencil and you bring it up into your hand and practice that, working on that opening and closing that thumb as it bends and moves out. So that's a really nice exercise to do. Okay, somebody has written me in Spanish, which I'll have to translate later because my Spanish isn't very good, but thank you. Let's see. I'm just going to try to find some more questions here. Okay, so someone is asking about how do you advise rebuilding motivation, confidence, and technique when working with an injury? I think the first thing, injuries are a lot of musicians have suffered from this. I think one of the things that's really important is about an injury is it actually causes you to step back and really analyze what you're doing physically at the instrument, and that goes for how you're sitting, how you're moving at the instrument. I am not an expert on this in terms of being a physical therapist, but I have found the Feldenkrais method an extremely helpful method for myself and for many students in working out balancing and ways of moving around the instrument. But in terms of keeping the motivation, I think the first thing obviously is to get the pain under control, with outside help, not a cello teacher necessarily. But then when you're ready to move back to the instrument, to start with really baby steps and to go back to the essentials, to start with the most essential ways in which we have contact with the instrument. So if the issue is with your left hand, the thinking about how you're balancing your arm weight with how you push the string down, for example. So many people, have a lot of tension by squeezing between their thumb and the finger that they're playing. So the first thing is to feel the weight coming from above and to have a thumb that's malleable under the neck. So one of the exercises that I like to give my students, which many of my students will have seen me do before, is the tickle the neck with the thumb exercise. So if I hold my cello to the side, you play a scale, and as you're playing the scale, you tickle the neck of the cello with your thumb. And what you'll notice is when you do that if you're not using your weight properly, the pitch will waver. So if I'm squeezing and I try to do that, the pitch wavers. But if I really have my weight balanced and I wiggle my thumb, then I can keep the pitch centered but still wiggle the thumb underneath. And that really gives you a way of feeling that weight getting the string down. So that's a good exercise for people that have had injuries, that have tension in their left hands. Another thing that I like to experiment with is the height of my elbow and how that affects the sound and how that affects the pressure on the string. So I'll practice where I had to start with my elbow way down, much lower than anybody would ever recommend playing, but then I practice coming up gradually and opening and feeling my back and my shoulder widening, collarbone widening, and feeling how that affects the balance on my finger. And that's a really nice, another way of thinking of that is imagining air under your armpit as you raise your arm. And that gives you a nice way of feeling the weight. And really one of the things for recovering from injury is to get really, really sensitive to how we move around the instrument. So how the height of the shoulder, the height of the elbow affects the pressure on the finger. So it's so that we're not localizing the cello playing. The cello playing starts from bigger place and goes in. So someone's asking about the organized, so various etudes books. So I'm going to put a shout out for one book that I've been using a lot lately. Is Hans Janssen's Cello Mind. Probably a lot of you know about this book. It's really great for developing technique and intonation work and so many things. I really recommend it, highly recommend it. I think it's available on Cello Mind website. So that's one thing we've been exploring lately. Another, actually quite a bit older book, which I actually left in my Juilliard studio and now can't get, but I have some of it at home in copies, is the Pais book for Pais was so the Pais book for left-hand technique, and that's a really fun book. I mean, I think he must have. I don't know if I'm sure that somebody who's listening right now knows about him. I can't tell you much about his background, but maybe someone else can write in. But this book is wonderful because it has so many different exercises for the left hand, and kind of like some of them are kind of atonal, and those are actually really interesting to practice. And of course, the Galamian scale study is another book that I use with my students, and then of course all the normal etudes, and the Starker organized method is also really great. So somebody's also asking about artificial harmonics on the C string up here, I think. So one of the things about false harmonics, and especially in a difficult position like there, is actually to have enough pressure in the bow, to have enough weight in the bow, and to have a good contact point. Because if you try to play with the fingerboard, it doesn't speak. So playing really close to the bridge as you move up in position for the false harmonic is really great. And by the way, false harmonics are really great to practice a lot of things with, because they're sort of they're more sensitive in a way. They exaggerate certain things. So for example, they exaggerate how much you hear shifting, and so practicing scales with false harmonics is a really good way to practice them so that you're timing your shift. So, or practice the timing of the shift with the bow. And with the false harmonic, it's a really good, it emphasizes the contact point because it doesn't speak if you don't have a good contact point. And it also really, you can hear your shifting very obviously. Okay, so someone's asking me about practicing articulation in Mendelssohn's Midsummer Night's Dream. So I think that again, getting the feeling of the fingers, the resistance of the bow in relation to the string is really important for this kind of stroke. So, and I think it's really important to clarify whether you're starting from the air or starting from the string. So how you initiate the stroke is a really important thing to think about. If you work on it from the string, you can feel that you should feel a sort of almost like a tug in the bow against the string. And to get to sort of, and you could sort of just put your bow on the string with a good contact point and gently compress the stick, almost like what I talk to my students about, like kissing the hair with the stick of the bow, gently doing that and feeling that resistance. And so when you're doing a stroke, that actually you might feel a little bit of like almost moving the stick towards the bow hair before you start. And that gives a nice kind of tension on the bow and gives you a little bit of the sense of feeling all of your fingers and the energy of your hand without squeezing a lot. I'm just talking about a little bit of gentle pressure on the bow to feel that the buoyancy of the stick, because that's what's going to keep the stroke very in control and with a nice clarity. Oh, so somebody would ask about the left-hand book author. I'll spell it for you. Hans Jensen, Jensen. He teaches at Northwestern University, and the book is I think he has a website called Cello Mind. Yeah, someone else wrote La Tecnica del Violoncello by Pais, Pais. Thank you for that. Okay, so quick exercises that could benefit both your left and right hands. I mean, there are so many. One thing I think is if I want to just quickly wake up my left hand, I work on very quick sort of impulses where I move from one finger to the other, making sure that I'm releasing the previous finger. So when I'm sort of tossing my fingers. And making sure that the way I leave the finger is something I emphasize, because that keeps you very alive. So if I often practice actually the courant of the Sixth Suite, as a way to wake up my left hand. I find that's one of the most useful things to wake up my left hand when I'm feeling, as the wonderful Bonnie Hampton says, cobwebby in my fingers. So the idea of releasing from one finger to another, the way you leave the previous finger gives the new finger energy, and you can use that movement as a way to work on that. It's a great way to wake up the hand and quickly. So I've got such a range of wonderful people that are watching this right now, from professionals to amateurs. So I'm open to questions if people want to ask more questions about practicing or keeping motivated. Obviously, I think that the wonderful stuff that's happening online has been incredible and really helpful for everyone. I think obviously the sound quality is an issue. So I think making personalized messages that you record with good sound quality and then put out there, I think, is also really important, so that people remember what the beautiful sound of the cello is like. Let's see. I'm just looking. So somebody's asking me what cello do I play on and what strings do I have. So I've had this cello since well, if I tell you how long I've had it, it's gonna, well, anyway, I've had this cello since 1984, and it's an English cello by Thomas Kennedy, and it was made in 1818, so it's over 200 years old. It's like having a sort of a wonderful crabby old friend. I know all of its idiosyncrasies, and it's done. For the playing that I've done in my life, it's been fine, and I've been very lucky to have it. It has at the moment let's see. At the moment I have Spiracore. The tungsten strings on the bottom, and Larsen strings on the top. Actually, right now I'm using a soloist medium on the top two strings. Another one's about tips on starting vibrato for adult beginners. So one of the things that's really important for vibrato is balancing. So where the height of your elbow actually has a big role to play in vibrato, actually. And the energy of and the freedom of your whole arm. So don't think of it as just something that happens in your fingers, but something that relates to the balance of your whole arm. So one of the exercises that we do, and I think Nancy here was watching before, I know that she teaches this, is to feel that is to sort of do big movements in the arm. And one thing that I like to do is, like, let's say we're going to settle on one note, but I do a big motion. People that are very tense to do that, they have trouble with the last bit. So like the last part of this. that over the internet, but as I get closer to approaching the pitch, I want to make sure that I don't start squeezing. So I keep this nice motion, and as I get smaller, I still keep the nice feeling of looseness and making sure that my thumb is loose underneath, so that when I start to hone in on the pitch, it's almost like a golf ball that's getting closer and closer to the hole and then drops in. So it's like you keep the motion as the motion becomes smaller and smaller, as you center in on the pitch. You keep the freedom of motion in your hand. If you notice yourself, like the motion stops before you've centered the note, that means you're tensing up in your shoulder probably, or in your elbow joint. So it's important to actually, even when you're vibrating, to keep a sort of sense of aliveness in the joints, especially here and also in the shoulder. Someone else asked how much I physically warm up before practice stretches, limbering up. That's I think a really great question, something really important. I mean, I've been doing actually yoga lately, and I do stretches like some yoga stretches, both strengthening and stretching before, and I think it's incredibly important to get that in before you sit down. I mean, I think that one thing that musicians, I mean, an athlete would never do a complicated, any kind of, sprint without warming up. So, I mean, I think it's so important for us to warm up without the instrument. So, what are my thoughts about comfortable playing at the tip of the bow? That's such a great question, and something I think I've been thinking about my whole cello career, because, and it's something that it's very interesting to me, as I have had many students over the years of different sizes. So, and I think different things work for different sized people. So, one of the things that we, a thing we think about with using the bow at the tip well is to move against the bow direction. So as you move, you move your body weight against it. You move your body weight in the opposite direction to the direction of the bow, and that can help you feel like almost like your bow is longer. So that's one way of doing it. But I have found that if I need power at the tip, and I'm doing that, and I'm a person, I'm about 5'5", 5 feet 5 inches tall. So I'm a medium-sized person, I guess you could say. When I'm out here on the A string and I'm moving again away from myself, I find that I have less power. So one of the things I've been experimenting with is moving with the bow. So if I'm doing, say, then I find if I move with the bow, then I actually can feel more comfortable here rather than having the cello far away. But with people with longer arms, they will find that moving with the bow is not necessary, that they can keep their motion going the opposite way. So it actually varies there are a couple of variables. One is how tall you are, how long your arms are, and also the quality of the sound that you're looking for. If you're looking for power at the tip, it's one thing. If you're looking for fluidity, it's another. So I would just suggest to people that you think outside the box and you don't always do one method or the other. You might find that moving with the bow is really helpful in some passages, and moving against the bow direction helpful in others. I'm getting some comments in languages that I don't know, but that's okay. We'll figure them out later. Good. So, other thoughts about, I know keeping us all inspired while we're practicing. I'm sort of curious what people have thought of practicing. I was talking earlier about the balance between picking up having ambitious projects versus having more manageable projects, which we can feel like we've accomplished something each day. So I encourage you to pick small, like, conquerable passages, whether it's 1 bar, 3 double stops, whatever it is, that you can feel like you've accomplished something, in the short term as well as the long term. So that, I think it's really important, because I think I'm hearing so many people talk about, thinking of the most ambitious thing they could possibly do, and then getting frustrated because they're not accomplishing it. So small, manageable passages are really can give you a little bit of a boost each day or each time you sit down to practice. So we still have some more time. Can people keep writing in comments? So how do I help students with intonation problems? Is another question I just got. So for some reason I was looking at my comments on another computer, and now that just disappeared. So I've lost this. But oh, here we go. I got it back now. Okay. Sorry for that little delay. And about, so questions here. Sorry, I'm just getting distracted because of a lot of comments coming in. Okay, so someone's asking about having troubles with organization on my practicing. So I did address that a little bit earlier, but I would say that your practicing needs to be, you need to have a distinction between your detailed practicing and your performance practicing. So that's one really important thing. So, to allow a certain amount of time for detailed work, and then a certain amount of time for performance, playing through pieces. That's one thing. So setting small goals, saying I have, I'm going to give myself 10 minutes to solve this particular problem. Even giving yourself taking a very tiny passage and giving yourself 5 minutes to solve it is actually a really useful technique, because when for example, if we're doing an audition and we have like orchestral excerpts to perform where we have, a very short time, if someone says, okay, can you try that again a little faster and do it differently, and you just have to think really quickly about how you might do that. Practicing, giving yourself small, like a time limit on how much you spend on a particular passage is also a really useful way of practicing, even if it's 5 minutes on a very small passage. That can be really helpful. In terms of organizing, you want to make sure that you have enough technical practice, that you're doing your basic, keeping your playing in basic shape with sixths and thirds and octaves and scales. But you don't have to always start your practice with your technique. It's important you can practice, you can do technical work in the middle of your practicing. I often don't actually like to start with, I might start with slow open strings, but then I might practice a piece, a melody or something slowly, and warm up that way. Or, as I said before, I might warm up with a courant from the Sixth Suite to get my fingers moving. And then later in the practicing scale. So don't always do everything in the same order. To mix it up is really important. A lot of people find it helpful to have a practice log, and to write down your goals for the day, to write down how much time you're going to spend on each thing. If you're working on a specific technical issue, it's often good to just sit down and really analyze how you're going to practice that particular issue, and not to try to take on too many things at once. I think that's one thing we make a mistake of doing. Like, we try to practice our bow distribution and practice our intonation. Everything's at the same time, but to take one element at a time and focus on that for a given amount of time is also a really good way to organize the practicing. So I think that someone's asking me about pressing the octave scale in Dvorak Concerto first movement. There are a number of different ways to practice that. I think one of the most important things is to actually not just to tense up and to try to do it, but to actually practice feeling loose between the octaves. So that actually it feels like a vibrato going up instead of like tension. So you could practice kind of doing like a big vibrato at first to get the feeling in your hand, and then practice it in rhythms. But I think the most important thing to do is to keep your hand loose as you go up. The other thing I would do is what I call, and my students would be aware of this, is practicing backwards. So you start with the top octave, and then you play the note, the A sharp right before, and then shift into it, and then play two octaves and go in, and then keep going down from a lower spot and going up and keeping your hand loose. It's really important to keep the forearm loose as you go up. So you want to keep that motion of freedom here. If you tense up in your forearm, you're not going to be able to get there. Or if you do get there, you'll probably be injured by the time you get to the top. So how would you recommend to practice maintaining a good sound while playing a very technically difficult passage? That's a great question. Actually, one of the things that I've been doing a lot with my students lately is we actually might play a passage, a tricky passage in the left hand while playing with a bow on another string. I'm trying to think of a good passage to use for that. Sometimes we do this with melodic things to make sure that we're not doing portato. So you can actually practice, like for example, a simple example of that would be to practice the Dvorak Concerto slow moves second theme, but to play just on the G string, but to finger it normally. So it would be something like this. And what that reveals often is a lot of people play with a lot of portato while they're doing it. And if they're wanting to control that, you can really hear, if you're playing on an open string while you're fingering on another string, it emphasizes, you can really hear what's happening with the bow. So we practice a lot like that. So fingering on one string and playing with the bow on another is a really useful way of working on that. And of course, that's actually almost even, of course, we want to practice also open strings when we're practicing melodies to practice the bow distribution. But doing this with the left hand is really great for making you focus on what happens with the bow. How do you avoid tension and in general and stay relaxed? I mean, I think that's a question, a big question, and something that I've sort of been thinking about my whole cello life, and I've tried sort of so many different ways of keeping loose from doing yoga outside of cello in order to stay strong to stay strong and supple is really important. Actually, I think I can't overemphasize how important it is to work outside of the instrument. I think when you're young, you don't realize how important. As you get older, that becomes sort of it becomes completely essential. But I recommend to all of you young people to start doing it now to strengthen and to support your back and so that we all don't end up with cello posture where you have, you're all, everything is closed in towards the instrument. So anything you can do outside of the instrument to keep yourself healthy will help you play in a more relaxed way. If you have strength and suppleness outside of your instrument, that will help your cello playing. I think one of the warm-up, people are asking me about warm-up exercises. I think in order to stay loose at the cello, I think it's especially if you're cold, is to practice big shifts. So whether it's 1 octave shift or even 2 octave shifts, we practice. And actually, one really important thing I notice with a lot of people is we always watch our left hands, and that's not so great. I mean, it's not good for many reasons, but I would advise everyone to think about what you're doing with your eyes and your head. So you might practice doing exercises where you're moving your head in different ways in relation to the bow. So for example, one exercise I might start by looking to the left and do big shifts, changing my head direction. I can do that the other way around as well, to start from the right and to do this as well. And you can practice. I ask my students to practice both ways. We also play scales that way, to keep the head and the shoulders and the neck loose. So a very simple thing is just to take open strings. I often warm up this way and just move and turn the head, or the other way, move with the. So those are nice ways to keep the neck and shoulders free. Another thing I like to do is actually try to talk and play at the same time. It seems like a really silly thing to be able to do, but if I can talk and play at the same time, then I'm keeping my jaw loose and I'm keeping my throat open. And those are things I often see people, getting tense in their mouth and tense in their jaw and neck. So even though the tension can creep in different places, and it's really important to keep ourselves loose. Another thing that singers think about the way they have their jaw when they sing is to imagine that they have, like 2 fingers behind their back teeth. And you can actually practice a scale keeping that in mind for yourself. Is like keeping your jaw loose and keeping space between your back teeth as you play the scale. That's actually more challenging than you think it might be, at least for those of us that tend to grind our teeth. So someone else has asked, how can we develop precise intonation? I've just changed my instrument. Any advice for getting used to it? I don't know if you changed from something that was bigger to smaller, or smaller to bigger, at similar size. I think one thing to understand, actually, when you're trying new instruments, trying an instrument that isn't familiar to you, is that there should be a feedback loop. And I think often when we try a new instrument, we sort of impose our playing on the instrument, but actually it's really important to listen to what the instrument is giving you as well, so you have this sort of feedback loop. That's true, of course, when we play anything. That's really important, but the listening as well as the determination to accomplish the task, we have to keep that loop open all the time. But it's especially obvious if you sit down at a new instrument, and you just kind of start playing. But I would say, start by really being slow and listening to how the instrument reacts, especially, if you have more weight in the instrument, how does the instrument react, and where is the limit of how much weight you can put in, and where does the sound crack? How does it react in different spots on the bow, closer to the bridge, closer to the fingerboard? Noticing, obviously, one of the things that can be different is where the thumb is placed, where the neck is in relation to fourth position, something that you might have to get used to with a different cello. Sometimes the string length varies. But I would say the most important thing when you're getting used to a new instrument and thinking about the intonation is to listen to the resonance of the instrument, to try to get the best possible resonance by starting with open strings and then moving to notes that have sympathetic vibrations most easily. So a G, just take a really resonant note like a D or a G on a D on the A string, and really experiment with your contact point and listening to how the instrument is responding. So start by really like listening and not imposing yourself on the instrument. Okay, so listen, I want to thank everyone from around the world for listening. Our hour is up now. I'm really happy to see so many of you sending love to everybody from New York City. We're all doing fine. Everybody, keep practicing and keep your social distance. And sending lots of love to everybody from New York. Thank you all.